Welcome to another week of mass communication. I'm your professor, Rick Ribello. And this week we're going to talk about the expansion of the written word. When we last left off, we were talking about GIs during World War II, reading things like comic books and pulp novels. What happens after World War II is we see an expansion of people getting educated. During World War II, the Montgomery GI Bill is enacted, which allowed for people to come back from war and to go to college with the government helping them and assisting them and paying for that. And because of that, you have more educated people. More educated people tend to read more. So there's an expansion of people wanting things to read. And even the people who didn't go to college became used to reading during the war. And it created a much larger body of readers out there. Both on the high end and low end. I mean, when I talked about Pulp Fiction before, the late 40s and 1950s, there's a real explosion in Pulp Fiction. And what is Pulp Fiction? Pulp Fiction is literature, mostly exploitive in nature, meaning sex, violence, okay? Sex and violence. Whether it be Harlequin romances, which are female and sex-oriented, or whether it be kind of like film noir pulp novels, which tend to be mostly private eye novels, things like that, which blend both sex and violence. And you have to remember, in the 40s and 50s, there was a very big delineation between men and women. Because of that, most authors would have pen names or pseudonyms. You'd have male authors who created female names so they could write romance novels, and then they would have their male name, which they would use to write exploitive novels. Same thing, vice versa. You had women who wrote romance novels under their own name and then action novels under another name entirely. And they did this because the companies believed that women would only read novels written by women and men would only read novels written by men, which nowadays seems preposterous, but back then it was considered the norm. And you had this separation. And also it was the separation in the style of novel, that they felt that women would only want to read about romance and that men would only want to read about violence. So it's interesting how sexist that sort of period of time is. But it is what it is. As we go on to the 1960s and 70s, we see that kind of rolling back a little bit. Pulp novels are still pretty popular. Even the Harlequin company, whether you realize it or not, has sub-companies that do action novels and things like that. But Harlequin is at that time, the biggest pulp publisher, along with Penguin Press and a few other people. So once you get into the 70s and 80s, we see the book industry kind of, say, stagnate, but sort of level off. They don't really have any more people, and they don't really have any less people. They have a certain type of demographic that stays pretty even. But once we get into the 90s and the early millennium, we see a lot of people not reading printed text. Now, let me be clear about this. Not reading printed text. People are reading, but not reading as much printed stuff. So we start to see the newspaper industry really falling apart and losing a lot of steam. The magazine industry takes an enormous beating. Because with the internet pretty much makes magazines irrelevant, because what magazines did is they gave you stories that you nowadays would see online. They'd tell you what movie's coming out, who's dating who, all that type of stuff, fashion, culture, all that sort of, as we call it, magazine stuff, is now completely being given to you by the internet. So, and the thing is, with magazines coming out once a month, by the time the story makes it into the magazine, you've already watched the trailer, seen the video, read the interview, done everything else. So by the time the magazine itself comes out, it's almost completely irrelevant. So it really hurts the magazine sales. Hundreds, if not thousands, of newspapers across the country close because people also get the news much faster than they would if they just had paper. People are getting their information 24 hours. You have 24-hour cable news stations. You have the internet, which is 24 hours. The internet gives you ultra-fast communication, instantaneous. I mean, even a website traditionally cannot get you information as fast as a Twitter feed could give it to you, or a blog could give it to you, where they're tweeting out things as they are happening, which you just could not do in the past. There's a problem with that because traditionally we had what we call gatekeepers, and these gatekeepers were editors, producers, and what they did was they would take a story before it went out to the public, look at it, decide whether or not the story was fair, to borrow a term from Fox News. They would decide whether the story was fair and balanced. If it was not, they wouldn't put it out. But the problem now with the internet is that everybody is scooping everybody, and stories are coming out fast. So everybody's afraid that somebody else is going to get a story out before them. And it's that fear that causes a lot of producers, editors, copy editors to put stories out that are not vetted, that are flat out not true, because they're just afraid that somebody else is going to tell that story. So it causes a big problem. The other big change when we get into digital written word is we have things now like ebooks, we have tablets, and we have audiobooks. And they change the industry quite a bit. From a strictly industrial perspective, a company would much rather sell you an ebook than a physical book. And this is why I think eventually everything is just going to be ebooks. And I know it's going to hurt the feelings of a lot of you who are very dedicated to buying physical books. But the problem is this. Ebooks cost a company very little. Because the biggest price, the biggest cost in publishing is shipping those books. If you've ever shipped books, if you ever shipped a couple of books, they're expensive to mail. Imagine mailing crate upon crate upon crate upon crate of books. Imagine, say, you're the company that puts out Stephen King novels, and you're shipping 1 million copies, 2 million copies of books. Most of the money you're going to spend is physically shipping that book from point A to point B. So if you could eliminate that completely, if you could take that price out of the picture, take the bookstore out of the picture, the middleman out of the picture, the shipping cost out of the picture, and all I'm doing is I'm taking a book which file is less than a megabyte and allowing you to download a file that costs me that's less than a megabyte big. That's going to take about 2 seconds or 5 seconds out of my server. That costs them nothing. So even if they're selling you an ebook at $10, they're making way more than they did selling it to you in a store for $21 or $15 or even $10. Because if you're buying a book for $10 in a store, they're losing money. So it's no wonder that the book industry really wants you to buy ebooks, to buy a tablet. Okay, I own one. And I admit it, it's not the same as having a real book. And everybody, we have this tangential thing about books. We like to feel a book in our hands. We like the weight of the book. We like the smell of the paper. And I think with generations coming up, and I know it might upset a few of you, generations coming up are not going to care. They're not. My son is 5 years old. He has always read things off tablets. He's always read things out of books as well. But I just don't think when he gets older, he's going to care about a book. He just wants the material. He just wants to read. He wants to consume. And I think at the end of the day, the cost, the ease of use, okay, will override any emotional connections people have with physical books. And like I said, I know that's disturbing, but it's the truth. And when you look also at audiobooks, having to create a CD and mail it out to you costs money. But now, if you look at Audible, they're just letting you download a much larger file, a 200 or 300 megabyte file. But they're just taking a hit off a server for about 5 minutes. And the audiobooks cost a lot more than the ebooks. An ebook on average is $7 to $10. An audiobook on average is $17 to $30, unless you're an Audible member, and then you're looking at, $15 a month for 2 books. But still, it's a huge saving for the industry. And audiobooks are interesting because they're kind of a Frankenstein mixture of reading and oral communication. and they're very popular. I mean, I use them all the time when I drive. So we're seeing a lot of different things happening, but I really feel that the push for digital written communication is only going to get bigger. It's seen a tremendous expansion in the last few years. You can get a Kindle now for $40 from Amazon, not used, not off eBay, not off Craigslist. You can get one really cheap, and then next thing you know, you're buying your books digitally. And it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And especially now when you look at textbooks, it is far and away cheaper to buy your textbooks for an ebook than it is to buy one from a store, buy a physical copy. So I think more students are going to be going the way of ebooks. I think even schools, a lot of schools now are giving tablets to students because it's cheaper for them to keep their books updated if they give away a tablet. So people are just going to become acclimatized to it, whether you like it or not. So that's kind of a talk and a look at the future of written communication.